The black moon of Vethkar hung in the cold darkness of space like a dead eye watching the galaxy turn beneath it. On this ancient rock stood the tribunal of species, where the powerful beings of the Galactic Concord gathered to pass judgment on those who broke their laws. Ambassador Marcus Cole had never felt smaller in his entire life. He stood in the observation gallery among creatures that towered over him and beings made of light and things that had no shape. His translator struggled. To describe humanity had only earned the right to send one observer to these proceedings 3 years ago, and Marcus was the unlucky soul chosen for the task. He could watch, but he could not speak. He could listen, but he could not vote. He was there to learn how the galaxy worked, and today he was learning something that made his stomach turn. The chamber itself was carved from the obsidian heart of the moon, and the walls reflected the cold light of 1,000 floating crystals that served as recording devices. Every species in the Concord sent representatives to watch these trials, and today the gallery was full because today they were trying a child. Her name was Kira, and she was 6 cycles old by the counting of her people. The Lorani Marcus watched her standing alone in the center of the chamber, and his heart broke a little more with each passing moment. She was small, even for her age, and her silver fur was dirty and matted from weeks in a holding cell. Her large amber eyes darted around the room, searching for a friendly face, and finding none. 2 guards stood on either side of her, massive reptilian creatures in ceremonial armor, who looked at her with complete indifference. To them she was just another case, just another number in the long record of Concord Justice High Judge. Vazax presided over the tribunal from a raised platform that seemed to float above the chamber floor. He was a crystalline, being nearly 3 meters tall, and light passed through his body in ways that created rainbows on every surface around him. But there was nothing beautiful about him to Marcus. The way he looked down at the small, frightened cub made the human think of a scientist examining a specimen he was about to dissect. The charges were read aloud by a mechanical voice that echoed through the chamber without warmth or feeling. The accused Kira of Clan Veth stood charged under Article 7 of the Collective Inheritance Statutes. Her mother, Mira of Clan Veth, had been a member of the resistance movement against Concord occupation of the Lyrani homeworld 6 months ago. Mira had led an attack on a Concord supply depot. The explosion killed 17 workers and destroyed resources worth millions of credits. Myra herself had died in the attack, but under Concord law, death did not end the matter. The genetic debt must be paid, and since Mira was gone, that debt fell to her only offspring. Marcus leaned forward and whispered to his translator, device asking it to explain the law more clearly. What he learned made him feel sick. The collective inheritance law stated that crimes committed by a parent transferred automatically to their children. If the parent could not pay the penalty, the child would pay it instead. It did not matter that Kira had been nowhere near the depot. It did not matter that she was too young to understand what her mother had done. It did not matter that she had spent the last 6 months crying for a mother who would never come home under Concord law. She was guilty because her mother had been guilty. Marcus looked around the gallery, trying to find anyone who seemed troubled by this. The Cathari delegation watched with their golden eyes half closed as if they were bored. The Vermex representatives were busy with their personal devices, not even pretending to pay attention. The Drathkai ambassador was eating something from a small container, completely unconcerned. Only the Lorani elder seemed affected, and even she sat in silence, her gray fur making her look ancient and defeated. Marcus had read about the Lyrani before coming to this posting. They had been conquered by the Concord 3 generations ago, and their resistance had been crushed again and again. Each time they rose up, more of their children were taken. Each time they fought back, their families paid the price. Eventually, they stopped fighting. They stopped speaking out. They sat in silence and watched their cubs be led to execution chambers. and they said nothing because saying something would only make it worse. That was what the law was designed to do. Marcus realized it was not about justice at all. It was about breaking the spirit of anyone who might resist. The trial proceeded with terrible speed. Witness after witness came forward to testify about what Myra had done, and none of them said a single word about Kira herself. A Concord investigator presented genetic evidence proving that Kira was indeed Myra's daughter, as if that was ever in question. A military officer described the damage to the supply depot in precise detail. A financial expert calculated the exact cost of the destruction down to the last credit. Through it all, Kira stood, silent and trembling. At one point, she looked up at the Lyrani elder with desperate hope in her eyes. Please, she seemed to be saying, please help me, please tell them I did not do anything wrong. But the elder looked away. She had seen too many cubs stand in that same spot. She had learned that hope was a luxury her people could not afford. Marcus found himself gripping the railing in front of him so hard, his knuckles turned white. He wanted to shout to demand they stop this madness, to tell them that what they were doing was wrong, but he had no voice here. He had no power. He was just a human from a young species that the Concord barely acknowledged existed. What could he possibly do against an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds? The answer was nothing. He could do nothing, or so he thought as the trial moved toward its inevitable conclusion. Marcus felt something stirring inside him. It was a feeling he remembered from his childhood when he had watched bigger kids pick on smaller ones. It was the same feeling he had when he became a father and held his daughter for the first time and swore he would protect her from anything. It was the feeling that told him some things were simply wrong, no matter what any law or any judge or any empire said. He did not know yet what he would do with that feeling, but as he watched little Kira shiver in the cold light of the tribunal chamber, he knew he could not just stand by and watch her die. Not without trying something. Not without at least trying to be human in a galaxy that seemed to have forgotten what that meant. The tribunal called a recess, and Marcus Cole did not waste a single moment. He rushed back to his small quarters on the observation deck and began pulling every legal document he could find from the Concord archives. His translator worked overtime, converting ancient texts into something he could understand, and his eyes burned from staring at his display screen. But he did not stop. Somewhere in these laws there had to be something he could use. There had to be a crack in the wall, a loophole, a forgotten rule that might save that little girl. The collective inheritance law was old, far older than Marcus had first thought. It dated back nearly 15,000 cycles to a time before the Concord itself existed. Back then the galaxy had been ruled by the ancestors of High Judge Verthax, a crystalline species called the Verkae. The Verkae did not reproduce the way most species did. When a Verkae grew old enough, a piece of their crystalline body would break off and grow into a new individual. But this new individual was not really new at all. It carried the same memories, the same personality, the same legal standing as its parent. To the Verkae, a child was quite literally an extension of the parent. They were the same, being in two bodies, so when a Verkae committed a crime and died before facing punishment, it made perfect sense to punish their offspring instead. The offspring remembered the crime. The offspring had been part of the parent when the crime was committed. The offspring was guilty. Marcus sat back and rubbed his tired eyes. He understood now why the law existed, but that understanding only made him angrier. The Lyrani were nothing like the Verkae. They were warm-blooded mammals who gave birth to cubs that were completely separate individuals. A Lyrani child did not share memories with their parent. A Lyrani child did not share consciousness or identity or guilt. Kira had no idea what her mother had done until the Concord soldiers came to take her away. But the law did not care about that. The law treated every species in the galaxy as if they were Verkae, even though almost none of them were. It was absurd. It was cruel. It was working exactly as intended. A soft chime at his door made Marcus look up. The door slid open to reveal Ambassador Thesix of the Cathari Dominion. She was a serpentine creature nearly 2 meters long with scales that shifted between green and gold. Depending on her mood right now, they were a neutral. Blue, which Marcus had learned, meant curiosity. "You did not return to the gallery when the recess ended," she said, sliding into his quarters without asking permission. "I was doing research," Marcus replied. Thesix's forked tongue flickered out, tasting the air in a way that always made Marcus slightly uncomfortable. "Research," she repeated. "You were looking for a way to save the cub." Marcus did not bother to deny it. "Is that so strange?" he asked. Thesix coiled herself into a comfortable position on the floor and regarded him with eyes that held more intelligence than most humans gave her species credit for. "It is not strange," she said. "It is very human." Marcus was not sure if that was a compliment or an insult. Thesix had been one of the few alien ambassadors willing to speak with him during his posting, and he had come to respect her sharp mind. But he also knew she had no love for species that challenged the Concord's authority. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Because I want to understand." "You," she replied. "The Cathari have been part of the Concord for 6,000 cycles, and in all that time, I have never seen a species react to these proceedings the way humans do." "How do we react?" "Like it matters," she said. "Like the death of one small cub from a conquered species is something worth losing sleep over." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "It does matter," he said. "She is a child. She is guilty under the law." Thesix replied, her scales flickered to a colder shade of blue. "The law is the law, and it has maintained order in this galaxy for longer than your species has existed." Order. Marcus repeated the word like it tasted bad in his mouth. "Is that what you call this? What would you call it?" "Oppression," he said. "Control through fear, breaking families to break resistance." Thesix was quiet for a long moment. Her scales cycled through several colors that Marcus did not recognize. Finally, she spoke again. "You are not wrong," she said. Marcus blinked in surprise. "The law was designed to control." She continued, "Every species in the Concord knows this, even if we do not speak of it openly. The Vokai created it to keep conquered peoples from rising against them, and when the Concord was formed, the law was kept because it still served that purpose." "Then why do you follow it?" Marcus demanded. "Because it works," Thesix said simply. "The galaxy is vast and filled with species that would tear each other apart without order. The collective inheritance law is cruel, yes, but it prevents rebellion. And rebellion leads to war, and war leads to extinction. You trade the lives of children for stability. We trade the lives of some children for the survival of many," Thesix corrected. "It is not a choice any of us enjoy, but it is the choice that has kept the peace for 12,000 cycles." Marcus shook his head. "That is not peace," he said. "That is just quiet suffering." "Perhaps," Thesix admitted, "but it is better than loud dying." She uncoiled herself and moved toward the door. "I came to warn you. Human, do not do anything foolish tomorrow. Your species has no standing here, and if you interfere, you will only make things worse for yourself and for the cub." She paused at the doorway. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is look away." Then she was gone, and Marcus was alone with his research and his thoughts and the growing certainty that looking away was something he simply could not do. He worked through the night cycle, reading law after law and searching for something, anything that might help. As the hours passed, he found himself thinking about his daughter Sarah back on Earth. She was 8 years old, and she loved to chase butterflies in their garden, and she always asked him to read her stories about brave heroes who stood up against impossible odds. What would he tell her if he went home having watched a child die and done nothing? What kind of father would he be if he taught her that sometimes you just had to look away? The answer came to him just before dawn. It was buried in an ancient text that predated even the collective inheritance law, a forgotten rule from a time when the galaxy was younger and justice still meant something more than control. Marcus read it 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he smiled for the first time since the trial began. He had found his crack in the wall. Now he just had to be brave enough to use it. The tribunal chamber was completely full when Marcus returned the next morning. Word had spread that the sentencing would happen today, and species from across the sector had come to watch. Some came because they had business with the Concord and wanted to show their loyalty. Some came because they enjoyed watching the powerful crush the weak. And some came because they had lost cubs of their own to this law and could not stay away no matter how much it hurt. Marcus found his place in the observation gallery and tried to keep his face calm. His heart was beating so hard, he was afraid the beings next to him might hear it. The plan he had formed during the night seemed foolish now in the cold light of the tribunal chamber. He was one human with no power and no standing against an empire that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. But then he looked down at Kira standing alone in the center of the chamber, and his doubt faded. Away she looked even smaller today. The guards had cleaned her fur, but that only made her look more fragile, like a doll that might break if anyone touched her too roughly. Her amber eyes were red from crying, and she kept looking around the room searching for someone who might help her. When her gaze passed over Marcus, something strange happened. She stopped searching. She looked at him for a long moment, as if she could sense something different about this strange, soft creature with no fur and no claws. Then she looked away again, but Marcus could have sworn he saw something like hope flicker in her eyes. Judge Verthax entered the chamber, and the crowd fell silent immediately. His crystalline body caught the light and scattered it across the walls in patterns that seemed almost beautiful until you remembered what he represented. He took his place on the floating platform and looked down at Kira with the same cold indifference he might show to an insect. "The tribunal will come to order," he announced. His voice echoed through the chamber without any mechanical assistance, as if the room itself was designed to carry his words. "We are here to deliver sentence in the matter of the Concord versus Kira of Clan Veth." A mechanical voice began to read the summary of charges, and Marcus forced himself to listen, even though every word made him angrier. The accused has been found guilty under Article 7 of the Collective Inheritance Statutes as the sole surviving offspring of the terrorist Myra of Clan Veth. She inherits full legal responsibility for her mother's crimes. The attack on Supply Depot Theta 7 resulted in 17 deaths and property damage valued at 4.3 million credits. Under Concord law, the penalty for these crimes is death. Marcus looked at the Lyrony elder, who sat perfectly still with her eyes closed. He looked at Ambassador Desix, whose scales had turned a pale gray that he had never seen before. He looked at all the other representatives from all the other species and saw the same thing on every face. Acceptance. They had seen this before. They would see it again. It was simply how the galaxy worked. Judge Verthax rose from his seat, and the chamber somehow grew even more silent. Light moved through his crystalline body in slow waves like a heartbeat made of rainbows. "The accused will face the chamber," he commanded. Kira turned slowly until she was looking up at the massive judge. She was shaking so badly that Marcus could see it from his place in the gallery. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was so small that the translation devices almost missed it. "I did not do anything wrong." Verthax showed no reaction to her words. "Under Concord law, genetic debt passes from parent to child," he said. "Your mother's crimes are your crimes. Your mother's guilt is your guilt. Your mother's punishment is your punishment." "No," Kira whimpered. "I want my mother. I want to go home." "The sentence is death by dissolution." Verthax continued as if she had not spoken. "The prisoner will be taken to the execution chamber immediately following this session. Her genetic material will be returned to her world as a reminder to others who might consider rebellion against Concord authority. This is the law. This is justice." This is the way he raised one crystalline arm in a gesture that Marcus recognized as the signal for the guards to take the prisoner. Around the chamber, beings nodded or looked away or simply waited for it to be over. And Marcus Cole took one step forward. The sound of his foot hitting the chamber floor was not loud. It was just a single step, just the soft sound of a boot on obsidian stone. But in that moment, everything stopped. Every being in the chamber turned to look at him. Every translator device tried to process what was happening. Every eye and sensor and crystalline facet focused on the small human, who had just done something that no one had done in thousands of years. He had interrupted a sentencing. He had moved forward when everyone else stood still. He had broken the unwritten rule that kept the Concorde's wheels turning smoothly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Verthax stared at Marcus with an expression that the human could not read, but that definitely was not friendly. The guards froze with their hands reaching toward Kira. The gallery of representatives watched with a mixture of shock and horror and something that might have been curiosity. Marcus felt every eye in the room on him, and he had never been more afraid in his life. But he did not step back. What is the meaning of this? Verthax demanded. His voice was no longer cold and mechanical. There was something underneath it now, something dangerous. Human, you have no standing in this tribunal. You have no right to interrupt these proceedings. You will return to your place immediately or face consequences. Marcus took a deep breath. His hands were shaking, but he forced his voice to remain steady. I am not speaking as a representative of humanity, he said. I am speaking as an individual, and I am invoking the right of challenge. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear Kira's ragged breathing. He could hear the soft hum of the crystalline recording devices capturing every moment, and then the gallery erupted. Beings shouted and hissed and made sounds that his translator could not process. Ambassador Thessex stared at him, with her scales cycling through colors so fast they seemed to blur. The Lyrani elder opened her eyes for the first time and looked at Marcus with an expression of pure disbelief. But through it all, High Judge Varthix remained still. His light pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Then he raised his arm, and the Touristas chamber fell silent again. The right of challenge, Verthax said slowly. You invoke the right of challenge. Yes, Marcus replied, I do. The ancient right allows any being to challenge a judgment by offering their own life as collateral. If I fail to prove the judgment wrong, then I will take the prisoner's place, my life for hers. Verthax says, light shifted to something cold and sharp. You understand what you are doing, human? Yes. You understand that if you fail, you will die in the most painful way our technology can provide. Yes, you understand that your species has no power here, and that no one will come to save you. Marcus looked at Kira. The little cub was staring at him with her amber eyes wide and wet with tears. She did not understand what was happening, but she understood that this strange creature was trying to help her. For the first time since the trial began, she was not alone. Marcus turned back to face the High Judge. I understand, he said, and I challenge this judgment anyway. The chamber remained frozen as High Judge Verthix processed what had just happened. No one had invoked the right of challenge in over 2,000 cycles. It was considered an artifact of a more primitive time when disputes were settled through combat and personal sacrifice. Most species had forgotten it even existed, but it was still part of Concorde law, and that meant Verthax could not simply ignore it. Very well. Human, he said. Finally, his voice had lost some of its cold certainty, and Marcus felt a small spark of hope. The right of challenge is accepted. You will have the opportunity to prove that this judgment is wrongful. If you succeed, the prisoner will be released. If you fail, you will take her place in the execution chamber. Marcus nodded even though his knees felt weak. The guards stepped back from Kira, and the little cub immediately ran toward Marcus. She grabbed onto his leg and pressed her face against his knee, trembling so hard he could feel it through his uniform. Marcus put a hand on her head without thinking and felt her silver fur soft and warm beneath his fingers. State your challenge, human, Verthax commanded. What grounds do you claim for overturning this judgment? Marcus gently moved Kira behind him, where she would be at least a little protected. Then he faced the High Judge and the gallery of watching aliens and began to speak. "My challenge is simple," he said. "The collective inheritance law is being applied to a species for which it was never designed. The law assumes that offspring are extensions of their parents, carrying the same memories and the same guilt. This is true for the Vakai, who created the law, but it is not true for the Lyrani or for most other species in the Concord." Vathak's light flickered with what might have been irritation. "The law applies equally to all species under Concord jurisdiction," he said. "That is the foundation of galactic order." "Equal application does not mean just application," Marcus replied. "A law that punishes a creature for something she cannot remember and did not participate in is not justice. It is simply cruelty wearing the mask of order." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Some of them sounded angry, but others seemed thoughtful. "You speak of biology," Vathak said dismissively, "but the law speaks of blood, and bloodline does not change. This cub carries her mother's genetic code, and therefore carries her mother's responsibility." Marcus shook his head. "Genetic code is not memory," he said. "Genetic code is not guilt. If you scan this child right now, your machines will show you a completely separate individual with her own neural patterns and her own consciousness. She has no knowledge of what her mother did. She has no memory of the attack. She is as innocent as any being in this chamber." "That is not the point," Vathak replied. His light was growing brighter, now pulsing with agitation. "The law exists to ensure that debts are paid. If a criminal escapes justice through death, then their bloodline must pay instead. Otherwise, there would be no consequence for those who sacrifice themselves in acts of terrorism. Then the law is about deterrence, not justice." Marcus said. "It is about making people afraid to resist because their children will suffer for their choices. Is that the foundation you want for your galactic order? Fear control, the threat of dead children." The chamber had grown very quiet. Now Marcus could see beings in the gallery exchanging glances and whispering to each other. He pressed forward, feeling like he was finally getting somewhere. "I have read your histories," he said. "I know why this law was created, and I know why it has been preserved for so long. It was designed to break resistance movements, and it works very well for that purpose. Conquered peoples learn quickly that fighting back means condemning their children. So they stop fighting, they stop speaking out. They sit in silence and watch their cubs die, and they do nothing." He pointed at the Lyrani elder. "Look at her," he said. "Look at what your law has done to her people. 3 generations of silence, 3 generations of obedience spot with the blood of innocent children. Is that justice? High Judge, is that something to be proud of?" Vathak's crystalline form was rigid now, and his light had turned a harsh shade that made the walls look like they were bleeding. "You speak dangerously, human," he said. "You accuse the Concord of—" "I accuse no one," Marcus interrupted. I observe that this law has only ever been applied to conquered species. I observe that no member of a voting species has ever faced execution for their parents' crimes. I observe that the powerful created this law to control the powerless and bad. Everyone in this room knows it, even if they pretend otherwise." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus saw beings in the gallery looking at each other with expressions he could not quite read. Some looked angry, some looked defensive, but some looked ashamed, and that shame was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. He took a step forward and felt Kira's small paw grip his leg tighter. "I am not asking you to tear down your Concord," he said. "I am not asking you to abandon your laws or your order. I am asking you to look at this child and tell me honestly that she deserves to die. Tell me that her death will make the galaxy better. Tell me that killing her serves any purpose other than fear." He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. "Or admit that you are keeping this law not because it is right, but because it is useful. Admit that you have traded justice for control, and that every species here has benefited from the silence it creates." Vathak's raised one crystalline arm. "Enough," he said. His voice boomed through the chamber, silencing the whispers. "You have made your argument human, and it changes nothing. The law is the law. It has stood for 15,000 cycles, and it will not be overturned." By the emotional pleading of one primitive species, Marcus felt his hope flicker, but he was not done yet. "Then let me invoke one more right," he said. Verthax paused. "What right?" "The precedent of first witness," Marcus replied, "under your ancient codes. Any species that identifies a structural injustice in Concord law may formally petition for review. If the petition is made publicly and witnessed by representatives of multiple species, then the Concord is required to consider it. I am making that petition now. In front of everyone in this chamber, I am witnessing that the collective inheritance law is structurally unjust, and I am demanding that it be reviewed." The gallery erupted again, but this time the tone was different. Marcus heard beings shouting languages his translators struggled to process. He saw Ambassador Desix staring at him with her scales turning a color he had never seen before. He saw the Lyrani elder rise to her feet for the first time in the entire trial. And he saw High Judge Verthax hesitate. It was just a moment, just a flicker of uncertainty in that cold crystalline form. But it was enough to tell Marcus that he had found the crack in the wall. Now he just had to break through it. High Judge Verthax stood completely still for what felt like an eternity. His crystalline body pulsed with light in patterns. Marcus could not understand, and the entire chamber waited in breathless silence. Finally, the High Judge spoke. "The precedent. A first witness," he said slowly. "You cite ancient law against ancient law human. Do you truly understand what you have done?" "I understand that I have the right to be heard," Marcus replied. "I understand that every being in this chamber is now witness to my petition, and I understand that if you ignore me, you will be breaking the very laws you claim to uphold." Verthax made a sound that the translator rendered as something between a laugh and a snarl. "Clever," he admitted. "You have done your research. But cleverness is not enough. The precedent requires more than a petition. It requires proof that a structural injustice exists. You must demonstrate that the law itself is flawed, not merely that its application seems harsh in one case." Marcus nodded. He had expected this. He had prepared for it during all those long hours in his quarters, and now was the time to use everything he had learned. "The proof is in this room," he said. He turned to face the gallery and spread his arms wide. "Look around. He continued. "How many species are represented here? Hundreds, maybe more. And how many of those species reproduce the way the Verke do? How many create offspring that are extensions of themselves, carrying the same memories and the same identity?" The chamber was silent. No one answered, but they did not need to. Everyone knew the truth. "Almost none of you," Marcus said. "Almost every species in this chamber creates children who are separate individuals. Children who have their own thoughts and their own experiences and their own choices to make children who are innocent of their parents' crimes by any reasonable definition of the word innocent." He pointed at Verthax. "But you apply a law designed for your biology to all of them. You punish beings for crimes they did not commit and could not have committed because they did not exist yet. You call this justice, but it is not justice. It is a weapon, and you have aimed it at the weakest people in the galaxy for thousands of years." Verthax. Light flared bright enough to make Marcus squint. "You go too far." "Human," he said. "I am only getting started," Marcus replied. His fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else now. It had become fuel for a fire he did not know he had inside him. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at this law," he said. "I see conquered species who cannot fight back because their children will pay the price. I see resistance movements, crushed not by armies, but by the threat of dead cubs. I see an entire galaxy trained to be silent and obedient because speaking up means watching your family die." He took a step toward the center of the chamber and felt Kira follow close behind him. "But here is the part you do not want to admit," he continued. I see that this only works because you make it work. Every species in this chamber has the power to change this law. You have votes, you have voices, you have the ability to stand up and say that enough is enough. But you do not. You do not, because the law is useful to you. You do not, because conquered peoples who cannot fight back are easier to control. You do not, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that you have been complicit in the murder of innocent children for 12,000 years. The silence in the chamber was absolute now. Marcus could feel it pressing against him like a physical weight. He saw beings in the gallery looking at the floor, or at their hands, or anywhere except at him. He saw the Lyrani elder standing, with tears streaming down her gray fur. He saw Ambassador Desix with her scales cycling through colors, so fast they seemed to shimmer. And he knew he was winning. I do not expect you to tear down your concord, he said more quietly. Now, I do not expect you to abandon order or embrace chaos, but I am asking you to look at this child and see her for what she really is. Not a criminal, not a terrorist, not a genetic debt waiting to be collected, just a scared little girl who wants to go home. He knelt down next to Kira and looked into her amber eyes. She did nothing wrong, he said. She is innocent in every way that matters. And if you kill her, you will be proving everything I have said. You will be showing the entire galaxy that your justice is just a fancy word for power, that your order is just a comfortable name for oppression, that your laws exist to protect the strong and crush the weak. He stood up and faced Verfax one final time. Is that the legacy you want, he asked? Is that what you want every conquered species in the galaxy to remember when they think of the Concord? Because they will remember. They will watch what happens here today, and they will know exactly what kind of civilization you have built. The chamber. Weighted Verthax was motionless, his light frozen in mid-pulse. For a long, terrible moment, Marcus thought he had failed. He thought the judge would simply ignore everything he had said and order the execution anyway. But then something unexpected happened. The Lyrani elder stepped forward. She moved slowly, her old bones clearly aching, but her voice was strong when she spoke. The human speaks truth, she said. My people have been silent for 3 generations, because speaking meant death for our children. But if we must be silent, then we are already dead. I add my voice to his petition. I witnessed the injustice of this law. Before the shock could settle, another voice rang out. Ambassador Desix rose from her coiled position, and her scales had turned a deep gold that Marcus had never seen before. The Cathari have benefited from this law, she admitted. We have used it to keep our subject peoples quiet. But the human is right. Quiet suffering is not peace. It is just waiting for the explosion. I add my voice to the petition. One by one, other representatives began to stand. Some were from conquered species, finally finding the courage to speak. Others were from powerful species, who had grown tired of pretending they did not see the truth. The voices grew louder and more numerous until the chamber was filled with the sound of beings finally saying what they had been afraid to say for thousands of years. Verthax watched it all with his light flickering in ways Marcus could not interpret. Finally, the High Judge raised his arm and the chamber fell silent. The petition is heard, he said. His voice was different, now somehow smaller. Under the precedent of first witness, and in recognition of the structural concerns raised by the human representative, this tribunal is required to stay all executions under the collective inheritance law pending a full review by the Concord Council. The prisoner Kira of Clan Veth is released into the custody of her people. This session is concluded. Marcus felt his legs give out beneath him, and he sat down hard on the cold stone floor. Kira threw herself into his arms and buried her face against his chest, crying with relief. Around them, the chamber erupted into chaos as beings argued and celebrated and tried to understand what had just happened. Ambassador Desix made her way through the crowd and stood looking down at Doshitulut. Marcus, with an expression he could not quite read. You have changed things today. Human, she said, I do not know if you have. made them better or worse, but you have certainly changed them. Marcus looked up at her with Kira still clinging to him. I did what I had to do, he said. Because someone had to. Physics's tongue flickered out thoughtfully. We thought your species was too young to understand the galaxy, she said. But perhaps you understand something we have forgotten. What is that? That the smallest voice in the room can sometimes speak the loudest. Truth. She turned and slithered away, leaving Marcus alone with Kira and the knowledge that he had done something that would echo through the galaxy for years to come. The review would take a long time. The law would not die easily, because too many powerful beings still benefited from it. But the cracks had formed, and cracks always spread. Someday, the whole rotten structure would come crashing down, and it would start with this moment. With one human who refused to look away, with one step forward when everyone else stood still, with one voice saying that some things are simply wrong, no matter what any law or any judge or any empire says. Kira looked up at Marcus with her amber eyes still wet with tears. Why, she asked. Why did you help me? Marcus smiled and wiped the tears from her silver fur. Because that is what humans do, he said. We stand up for the little ones, even when we are the little ones ourselves. She did not fully understand his words, but she understood what they meant. She understood that somewhere, in a cold and uncaring galaxy, there was at least one species that still remembered what it meant to be kind, and that was enough to give her hope for whatever came next. Outside the tribunal chamber, the stars burned on as they always had, but something had shifted in the space. Between them, something small and fragile and impossibly strong. The galaxy would never be quite the same again, and it all started with a single step forward.